You're listening to Depth Perception, supported by our patrons on Patreon. Hi, Depth Perception listeners. Today we're going to talk about clowns. You might have heard my poem, Be Creative, which we put up on the feed. I recorded a version of it with banjo accompaniment. You're also going to hear that as interspersed in the musical interludes this week. Some of the research that I did in writing this poem was what originally got me interested in the topic of sacred clowns to begin with. You know, it's funny, we didn't really talk about the origin of that during this podcast episode. Maybe I'll do a separate thing on that later. But at any rate, unlock the mimes. You will in time. Be creative.
So let's define a clown society, I guess. A clown society is a society in which clowns or heyokas, which are distinct enough to be differently named.
That was just Wikipedia on its bullshit. There's a ton of different types of North American, like indigenous clowns and clown societies. Heyokas are just one of the examples that's the most studied.
Okay, so that's Wikipedia just not being good?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
But it's not what we thought, which is a society that has clowns. It's societies in which clowns have like a prominent role as a sacred figure, or as like from David Graeber's stuff that I watched right before we started today, like a role as like a political figure. I thought that was really interesting that I mean, I don't know anything about David Graeber. He might just be like an asshole, but he might just be like finding stuff that corroborates his opinions. But I would have to read more to know. But like, I thought it was really interesting that he says that like clowns are people that are around for the king's benefit or the queen's benefit, or.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really interesting, and like not in the way that people would expect, which is like, it's good for the king to have somebody that they can like throw tomatoes at. It's like, you want somebody that other people aren't going to take too seriously, that can like tell you when you're being shitty, when you have a bad idea, things like that. I thought that was a really interesting,
right.
I mean, I don't know. You can probably tell me if that's a fact. Like I said, I just don't know whether David Graeber is like a guy to be taken very seriously about things that aren't his original idea.
I would have to take Graeber at his word as well. He's my source mainly. What I will say is he's pretty responsible about it in his book with Salins, where they talk about clowns and kings and the relationship, and they draw on a lot of societies from around the world. But they don't do a perfect job. You couldn't, but by the nature of anthropology. But they try to keep accountable to like the troubles of like extrapolating across societies, like taking particular situations and making generalizations. But what they do bring to your attention, and I think you could probably do this just with Europe too, with excluding other clown societies that they did use, is that like clowns exist in many different pockets of many different societies, but they always have the role of like being the one in the room who can say the thing that no one else can say, whether that's to a king or to ordinary people during a festival season like Carnival or various indigenous American festival seasons. I give a lot of examples. But just like across the world, there's a moment, there's a space, right, in which a clown can operate that no one else can. Which is he makes the point, and this is a very, I think, a thing that Graeber likes to talk about as an anarchist as well, is like a system can't generate itself, which is like why you need police, right? Like you need police to be above the law in order to enforce the law, for the law to make sense. And he actually makes the argument in his What Are Kings book. He and Salins make the argument that like there's certain situations, circumstances in which historically, plausibly, clowns could have developed into kings, or clowns could have developed into police, where sometimes they already serve that role, but in the sense that they're a permanent force.
Well, he also says the other thing as well.
Yes, he also says that the other thing as well, which is, did clowns become kings? And when you think about like the King of Fools during Carnival, he makes the point that like, did everybody just, kings historically were people who were special physically or mentally in some way, often physically, were distinctive, and there was a ritual aspect of it. He and Salins explore the idea in their book that like there's a certain of exploring of possibilities of like the way that a society could function, the shape that it could take, that probably has taken place many, many times over history. It's not unique to like this era. It's taken place on societies of all scales. Like we shouldn't, well, I'm kind of being idealistic about this, saying like we shouldn't be afraid of like reimagining society. But what he's saying is like the idea of a king probably came from like rituals. What in today's kind of anthropological minor context we would probably want to refer to as rituals, but like not to imply that the things that we do today are less ritualistic. I want to emphasize that, but like certain basically what he says is people were probably doing things that looked like worshiping kings before they were actually worshiping kings, and therefore in a situation like that you can see how the line between a fool, just a distinctive person, and a king might be blurred. In a society where in general people who are distinctive are like revered and thought of in some way as sacred, it would be easy to understand how a group of people like that gets together in the first place. And then you look at something like a king's court, where historically in Europe, like, and also actually we know in the court of Moctezuma, the Aztec and the Mexican Empire as well, right? Like people who were distinctive, like little people, giants, people with specific distinctive features, generally are going to gravitate, like kings are going to like invite those types of people into their courts because they're unique. Perhaps unique people were already gathered together like in some kind of social relations simply by virtue of the fact that they, among other people in the society, were upheld as in some way sacred. And the king who kind of sits in the middle of all of them, who's not necessarily in any way special, comes later. There's a lot of ways that it could have happened. And what Graeber does do is point out that whatever conclusion you make, you can't actually draw like a through line from things that are happening today to things that happened in the past. But if you start, what he does beautifully in this book, and in the book, the kids' book version that he reads from, that we'll link, is show you a little flavor of those possibilities, like how some of these elements that we don't typically rearrange. Oh, like what if I moved these sort of like cultural pieces around in my own folklore or whatever? And he gives you those possibilities, a couple of them. It's very cool. Yeah, clowns and kings, right?
When I was listening to the episode of Weird Studies today, What a Fool Believes, they were talking about the tarot and how regular playing cards developed from the tarot. So what is the reason? I mean, maybe it's like so obvious. It's because like it's just like the royal court, and the jester is an important figure. But I know that the tarot like developed out of like esoteric like secret-y stuff, right? I mean, it developed because of like a magical tradition, right?
It's not really clear. On Weird Studies, they make it sound like they kind of both believe, I think, that some form of divination that had a lot of the same archetypal imagery, symbolism in general, and maybe some of the same like sort of divinatory associations, and already existed in some form. But as far as like a history book is going to tell you, as far as like the most current research is going to tell you, tarot developed in like the Middle Ages as a playing card, or as a card game, that then began to be used for divinatory purposes because the cards tended to be decorated really exquisitely.
What I'm asking, I guess, is the only two things that I really see in common, besides the fact that there are like 4 suits and whatever, is like the only thing that's held over, I feel like, is the king and the Joker. Right? That's the Hierophant and the Fool.
There's what are they called? Face cards. There's sorry. There's the major arcana. So there's the Emperor and the Empress, and those are separate. But then there's also like, there's like within each suit the swords, cups, pentacles, and wands.
Yeah, wands or staves or whatever.
There's also like the same kind of gradations that there are in a normal playing card deck, except there's a couple more face cards. That's what it is. I can't remember exactly what they are. There's a page. There's a knight.
Well, yeah. So what I'm getting at is, do we know why the face cards were kept?
I guess we don't exactly know, other than that just like people. I think it's like more like people naturally figured out how to play games with subsets of the cards, right? So then it's like, okay, well, what if we just take the same number of cards from each suit and we put away the special cards?
Because there are what,
the
like 72 cards?
The major arcana. Yeah, all the 22 major arcana, we put those away and we just use a subset of the suits. That's like a normal playing card deck, right? And it's like, okay, so once that catches on, you could see how like, okay, if people were focused on that, and most people aren't using them for divinatory purposes anyways, it's just sort of like an accident of history that the tarot game fell out of favor. And then therefore, anytime that you have a tarot deck today, you're not doing it for the cards. The card decks that you would have have become a separate entity. Yeah, except that the Joker, the one major arcanum that is stuck around in the deck is the Joker, right?
So what do you think the deal is with the cards changing then? Why do you think like the tarot deck is not just the regular bicycle card deck?
I think it's an accident of history. Today I was reading about how. Let me give you an example. I was reading a really cool article about how, like, when tuning systems were being developed in the Middle Ages, there was different ideas about what was consonant and what was dissonant. I'll just give you an example right with my keyboard. This would be so easy.
Well, like, there were evil intervals, right? There were like sinister intervals.
Yeah, but that's not even what I mean. That's like a byproduct of the experimentation. But the main system was quite similar in certain ways to 12 equal temperament, which is what we have like on a piano. But the main consonances were, sorry, not that. That's the evil interval. Is like a perfect fifth, right? And whoops. And like ninths, and a lot of the time there's like a melody line which comes from like a choral, like a melismatic kind of choral line in a church, like something very ornamented, and then people are harmonizing above and below it. I can't improvise that way, but people do it. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that idea that a fifth was the most consonant interval that didn't have to resolve, and that major thirds were kind of seen as more dissonant and needed to resolve in that manner. That was kind of, the article that I was reading was kind of insinuating that was a bit arbitrary, and that a different tuning system instead of the 12-tone tuning system that we have could have come into use. The example that he gives is the 17-tone, which is like to divide an octave into 17 steps instead of 12. You don't get these kind of chords. You don't get major chords. You can't really resolve like... But the point that he's making is you get really, really nice fifths. And you get certain other intervals. And if we had just continued down that path of like fifths are the most consonant interval, there would have been no real logical reason to improve towards thirds being the relatively good thirds of 12 equal temperament. And we might have ended up with something like 17 notes per octave. So in a sense, that historical moment was kind of arbitrary. That the difference between deciding to play with a 12-card game or a 17-card game, like on the scale of large-scale time, it's kind of arbitrary. Of course, you could look at the individual decisions that were made during that time and say, well, it was not arbitrary. But to the extent that most people were ever going to learn about it, you could present it as arbitrary and kind of not be lying. And that's what this person is kind of making me think about in his article about 17 tone. Yeah. So that's kind of how I think of it. It's just the game that ended up developing.
Okay, and so speaking of the cards then, it seems like there's a reason the cards come in the order they come in, right? In the tarot deck, I don't know anything about a regular card deck. It's amazing that I somehow know more about the tarot.
Yeah, there's an order. The order of the major arcana is like seen as a progression.
Yeah, it's like it's the progression of a character, right?
Yeah. Usually, yeah, it's like a movement of a journey.
They're all archetypes.
Yeah.
It's like you start as the baby, the fool, and you become, I don't know, who's it? I don't know what's at the end. I haven't made it that far through the deck yet.
I think it's the world. The world is the last one. It goes judgment and then the world, I think, are the last two. Yeah, and some people will put... The interesting thing is that since the fool is the only one who's unnumbered...
well, mine has a 0 on it. I don't know what the deal with that is.
Yeah, the Rider-Waite, they put a 0, but the oldest tarot deck that we know about, the fool has no number. Part of it's because it's Roman numerals, so they couldn't have put a number, because there's no Roman numeral 0, yeah. But, so the fool is sometimes seen as, like, sort of the one who progresses through the journey, but that means that the fool can also kind of start anywhere. You can also look at it as a cycle. There's a lot of ways to organize, or to sort of think about that unnumberedness of the fool. And only one of them is that the fool as the beginning or the end, It's very cool.
Also makes me wonder whether the fool exists the whole time or if the fool, disappears.
Maybe the fool made it out and decided to get rid of all those cards, and that's why the fool is the only one left in the modern playing card deck. He ate all the other archetypes. As much as I'm saying, we need to bring fools back, we need more clowns. The clown has disappeared. Maybe that's what the clown wanted. Maybe the Western clown wanted to eat up all of the other archetypes and just live peacefully in our card decks. The only modern, I think, instantiation of the sacred clown, really, that's kind of obvious, that can obviously be drawn back to that, is the fool in the playing card deck, because he has a direct link to the tarot, and in the tarot he's well established as a sacred character in as much as any of them are, or at least he's been read that way over and over and over. I guess he doesn't have to be sacred, but I've never heard a serious discussion about the tarot, the major arcana, that doesn't imply that there's something deep about these characters. They're rich with imagery, and that's what gives them their sacredness in a way.
Who knows what the person who first drew the deck was thinking about, but the idea of what the clown is a strong representation of somebody at the beginning of a journey, right? That's the state they're always meant to be in, right?
They're always, a clown is somebody who's always at the beginning of a journey.
Yeah, always as ignorant, not, or as vacuous or whatever. Ignorant might be a bad word. But always as empty. There's the idea that you didn't come from nowhere. There's things that you know on the instinctual or the intuitive level, and that's what clowns are about.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really cool consideration for the pure incarnation of a human is the fool. It's a person that's meant to be untainted by their society and just the way that you can't help but become as you grow up. Reinhard Horstkata is his name. The video is called A Clown's Philosophy, and he says in that video, for me, the clown is the whole human being in the sense of humility, freedom, dignity, and the playfulness. Yes. So this was the video that galaxy brained me. It was very brain soluble for me. Because I when we started researching for this episode, I wanted to take the scary clown angle, right? Because that's how I see clowns. I think heavy makeup anyway is kind of freaky. It forces me into the uncanny valley, which is a place that I normally choose to go on my own. And clowns are like the epitome of heavy makeup. It's the whole way we identify them on the superficial level, I guess. But now, like, just because of that video and some of the other videos that I watched, and it's amazing what making an effort to understand something that's scary can do. It seems so obvious. I don't know, it just really made me like reconsider what the objective of a clown is. It's not to be like balloon animals. That's just like a side effect. I mean, the scares are just a symptom, right?
I think it's interesting that, I mean, I know that I wrote down here that there's a progression implied. You know, there's a progression in what I wrote down from sacred, silly to scary, but that's not really how it actually pans out. It's just how I think it panned out in European society. But there's little hints. If you look at, I was reading about like places where clowns sometimes have a sacred or ritual role or festival role, but sometimes nearby clowns are basically function as police during a certain festival season. And then in maybe overlapping that region in another region where they don't have the festival season, there's also a use of clowns or clown masks specifically to like scare children to not do certain things. And the only documentation of a Haudenosaunee clown that I could find was a clown who in English is called Long Nose, who is used to like frighten kids. He's like a cannibal clown. So the idea of a scary clown is not unique to Europe.
There's not like a set route of progression of clown perception or clown tolerance, as I called it. I mean, I'm sure in plenty of cultures, like the thing that we call a clown would have been a scary character, like a deity that you know, whatever role is applied to a specific deity. Maybe like a lot of times, obviously, it's the trickster. Although sometimes it's like the enlightened one is the clown. The same guy, Reinhardt, was talking about clowns as poets. I mean, there's just a ton of different permutations. I walked into this thinking the scary one was the coolest one. I came out of the research period with just a broader idea of like how cool the idea of the sacred clown is. It made me look at like characters from fiction that are clowns. Fans of the Final Fantasy series will know Kefka, who is like a jester. And just to consider what they mean.
There's a few sacred clowns in Adventure Time, I must say, too. Jesus. I think if I thought about it for a while, you could probably come up with more. One example of a sacred clown is basically anytime you have a character that grants a wish, you know, and there's a twist. Whether it's a genie, you know, or a trickster. So there's that. There's also the character of Magic Man, he just like pulls pranks on people sometimes, and his arc is kind of really important actually in the show. There's definitely an argument for him being a sacred clown. There's also Choose Goose, who is just like a goofy jester merchant who like speaks in riddles. There's it's cool.
It's just helped me to recontextualize. I have a very set image of what a clown is. A clown is a silly thing, or it's a scary thing, and just being invited to like find out about the sacred element of clownery, or whatever the verb is. I don't know. It just asks you to perceive something differently. I don't know. I mean, that's like the great thing about doing this podcast is I find out about things that I've never known before, and it forces me to think a little more.
Same.
Like I told you about that character from Bloodborne, Rom, the vacuous spider, and there's Kefka from Final Fantasy, which I think in the case of Final Fantasy, I think they might just like have to consider how to make a crazier looking villain every game. But when I go back and I play Final Fantasy VI, I'll find out whether there's like something more to it.
Some very tall people believe that there is no way out of the metaphor, or at least that this is the meaning of the ways in which they tend to act. Many such people are not trying to be very creative. They have no need for the good chance. The fight is really more of a dance for some of the tallest people on land, but nonetheless there is something that they too should understand. The parallel lines will never converge no matter where on the blue field they endeavor to really stand. In And despite what we've heard from our teachers, yes, even our very creative and fighting teachers, there are no parallel lines, points, pixels, or pentagons outside of those that we imagine that we hold in our heads' hands. Yeah, a lot of clowns are like parodies of country folk, and there's a certain kitsch, I think, that was associated from the beginning. I don't have a lot of evidence for this, except for one sentence in a Wikipedia page that said, like, oh, like, the Commedia dell'Arte tradition in northern Italy was based on certain southern, like, comedy plays. And I was like, that's really intriguing. Couldn't find anything about it. But that idea of, like, people from the south of Italy also being seen as, like, hick, you know, I think is probably related to that as well.
Yeah, well, the word clown, apparently, I guess, according to the Low German dictionary that I looked at, and I don't know if it was David Graeber, if it was one of the other, like, philosophy clown videos that I watched. Some of the videos said it was from German. Some of the videos said Shakespeare did it. I don't know which is true. It seems like Shakespeare made up enough words. I think we can give credit to the Germans for this one. But it just literally is a word that means, like, a rustic. Mm-hmm. That is what the word clown means.
Makes sense. It's interesting that the word pagan also comes from the same kind of derivation.
Oh, that is interesting. I didn't know that. Clowns, as we see them, are typically like parodies of poor people, turning their pockets out and shrugging their shoulders, and they've got, you know, the big red alcoholic nose. And...
Interesting how the nose is probably the most altered feature of a clown, or one of the most, like, across cultures.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is, like, related to, like, the story of Pinocchio, for example. The clown is a trickster. When Pinocchio lies, his nose gets bigger.
I feel like the Pinocchio story is very much in the aesthetics of Commedia dell'Arte. Maybe there's specific puppet shows, too, that I don't know about, but, you know.
I had the Wikipedia article open until about 15 minutes ago, but I never read a line of it. Of Commedia dell'Arte, that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is interesting. I wonder what, like, the nose meant to people in a different time. You know, when that image was conceived of the clown with the funny nose.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's interesting that people, you know, the nose changes. The nose is like a prominent feature of the face. Circus clowns. The cool example that does still exist as a clown society in modern, you know, Western society. A lot of things about the circus suck, but I think the idea of, like, there's certain enclosed spaces and times, you know, like carnival's sort of a temporal one, but circus is a zone that's closed off from the rest of the world where, like, you can do clowns, you can do certain things that aren't really, you know, I feel like you have to be a certain amount of serious about the fact of the way that the world is organized in Western society most of the time. And in a circus, that's willfully taken apart a little bit. In certain festivals and fairs, that's taken apart a little bit. There's something a little bit anarchistic, especially about the most organic of, like, festivals and fairs. And I once read an article about, like, the anarchy of, like the communities that spring up around dead shows. You know, the dead show is just sort of like the thing that is the excuse for it to exist. Maybe it's the circus tent, you know. And then everything else that happens within it is just sort of a self-organizing apparatus. And there's something appropriate about clowns being in a circus. Oh, and now I'm thinking about Terence McKenna saying that DMT is like it has the quality of the circus or of a carnival, and he himself being some kind of an anarchist and describing the things that he sees as machine elves, and they have a distinctly clown-like tricksterish nature to them. So I feel like I'm kind of starting to just go into that territory at this point. I don't know. I think that circus clowns sort of, I guess what the connection really is just that drugs, like circuses, like lots of things in Western society, provide spaces for us to, like, kind of participate in these sort of subversive realities, but they're very contained. You know, the experience of doing a drug, I think the particular Western idea of addiction, I think, is linked to this, you know, is linked to sort of like that, like, well, when you do the drug, like, you're in the drug, and then when you're outside of the drug, you're outside of the drug, and you should be able to control when you go in and out, because if you can't control when you go in and out of like the circus, then the circus isn't really enclosed. The circus isn't really cordoned off. I think this is maybe related.
That's interesting. So I was just gonna ask you why you think that clowns went from a prominent place, at least in Western societies, to, being confined almost to circuses. I mean, where else do you see a clown except for like a dealership or something?
Yeah. I think in a way the fear of clowns is maybe deeper than the sort of view of them as just funny, right? Because clowns are inherently subversive. Like, the superficial meaning of the fear of clowns is like they're scary looking, but we kind of made them scary. We made them scarier and scarier so that it was easier and easier to fear them. You know what I mean? Like, but so on a level, they like represent something that should be feared on an image level today because of how they generally look. But like on like a deeper functional level, they're also something to be afraid of. And I think if you can control the image of the clown, you can control its role.
So are you saying that it's like? Are you saying that it's like society is like embracing like the veil by sequestering clowns away to special places where you have to go to a special place to see a clown? It's not like the clown has a special place. It's like the clown is put somewhere.
Reinforcing the idea that if there's a clown out of context, that clown is a threat also.
Right. So they never stopped occupying their role in society.
But they're just extremely relegated to like one card on a playing card deck that's stripped of its meaning. The Joker's still there, but he doesn't have his journey. When a clown pops up, like some guy in a clown costume pops up at, behind a park bench at twilight, the media jumps on it, and there's all of these, and the way that the media works, it creates copycats, further like allowing for, I think, the perpetuation of this media narrative of like scary clowns. If you see, and of course it's all because of Stephen King's It, which is like a really ingenious, I think, manipulation of the idea of a scary clown. I don't think Stephen King is responsible for this, but I think that the fact that the scary clown is so useful in reinforcing the idea that clowns with actual power, clowns who are unbounded by the circus ring, are scary. I think that that's like really actually like a really important part of why we can't have clowns in any kind of sacred role in society.
Just to set the record straight a little bit, John Wayne Gacy came first. He was like the serial killer that dressed up as a clown.
Oh, he was who inspired.
He came before Pennywise.
Okay.
I didn't know about that.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah. But I just, yeah.
And there's clearly a few really famous European clowns. And I mean, like, if you looked at in certain places again, it's the Western world, you're going to find like street performer clowns. But I just mean in the popular imagination, and certainly in the American imagination, yeah. I think what I'm saying holds water.
Well, yeah, there's like the Pagliaccis and the Bodos and the Harlequins and
yes.
Yeah. And like, we still get our like scary clowns, the Joker and Harley Quinn and the unoriginality of their provenance is striking me over the head just now, but we still get them. Jack Kirby, maybe it's Jack Kirby's fault. Maybe Jack Kirby is responsible for John Wayne Gacy. I don't know. But what do you think the real deal with like that? It's like one of the last things that happened before Trump, and we like gave up on it immediately. But there was the scary clown phenomena of like 2015. I mean, that's the last thing I remember before Trump. I spent a lot of time in the last 4 or 5 years losing my memory.
Is Trump related to that? Is Trump a scary clown?
What I mean is, like, you remember there was like that spate of clown sightings. I'm just saying that was like one of the last things I remember from before Donald Trump.
I couldn't have even told you that was before Trump. I thought that was like 2018. I didn't even.
Oh no, I feel like it was a while ago. I feel like that was like high school vibes.
Oh, okay.
But I'm just asking what you think. Like, what you think the deal with that was? Why that was such a thing? Why, like, an entire generation of people was scared of clowns for a year?
I wasn't. I have never been scared of clowns.
Okay,
I don't know why that is, but
I don't think anybody's ever said an entire generation. They meant every single person.
right. I assume that you meant everybody except for me, and I wanted to make sure you knew that I was the one person who is excluded from that. It's because I was the scary clown. That's what it means.
Yeah.
No, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I thought we weren't gonna have a serious talk about this, but
no.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I think it's kind of if I hadn't already said the thing about what's it called, about like the way the media picked up on that would be my answer, but I don't want to repeat it. Like,
well, that's what I'm talking about. Why do you think the media picked up on it?
I think that scary clowns, like, they sell. It's like, it just seems like a kind of a ham-fisted media, like
you think it was something going viral.
Sorry, like a content editor just being like, oh, this is good SEO, like scary clown. People like it, the It 2 came out. When did that come out? Like pretty recently.
I don't know.
It's in the air.
I didn't like the original one. I'm not going to watch the remakes. So you think it was just something going viral, and it wasn't like the temperature of society being taken?
No, I think only in the most superficial way.
Reality.
Just like scary clowns.
It changed the temperature of society for a second.
Maybe that's true. Especially, I mean, that can be a very subjective thing too. So, like, if that's what you experienced, then yeah, But I feel like I don't think that was the nexus of like the deep clown fear. I think that the clown fear is actually kind of a very broad, widespread thing. And that was just one manifestation of it.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't think it represents a shift.
Well, I mean, do you think we would have gotten the It reboot without it?
Good question. I don't know. I guess the It reboot did come after that, actually. I think yes. I don't think maybe in like an indirect roundabout way, it gave some people some idea. It made people think about clowns a little bit more. But I don't think it was like a room full of people being like, clowns are big right now. Like, let's capitalize on clowns. I will say this though. I think the Joker movie suffered partly because people don't understand the idea of a clown, like, as a messenger of any kind. Like, people couldn't palate the idea. I think that the Joker, I think a lot of the media couldn't palate the type of social commentary that was being made in the Joker, partly because of who it comes from. Like, the reason
Robert De Niro couldn't handle it.
Robert De Niro can handle. Well, I mean, could he? Or you say he couldn't? That's right, he couldn't handle it. I think the structure of that movie, the way that it makes fun. Spoilers, just in case. The way that it pokes fun at things that sort of stand in as symbols for the normal workings of society, that normally you might think of as a bit more indirect. Like, they actually make this like wholesome late night show into like a symbol of like punching down, right? In a way that it's not usually so direct. Maybe on certain shows it is, but something that mainstream. Maybe Ellen comes close sometimes by being mean-spirited with certain jokes. Like this guy's Arthur's hero, right? Murray Franklin's his hero, and he plays a clip of Arthur bombing at a comedy club, and it, like, on his show, for laughs. His joke is just that Arthur's jokes aren't funny, and for them to then like show him Murray Franklin being like unmasked in that way, in kind of the only possible way, without commenting on whether it's right or wrong. I think that's what made people really uncomfortable. I think that the fact that the only thing people could say about that film was like, this is going to encourage incels or whatever to like shoot things up, is because people were just utterly unprepared to engage with the messages that were being presented in that movie. I think there are valid criticisms of the way that it got presented, but I saw very, very little discussion of those ideas. And I think part of it is because, again, there is no room for clowning today. Like on a like a mass media scale, it can't. Mass media cannot handle a clown.
Mm. Well, the Joker and Batman have like an interesting dynamic, right? And there's like that, like the wrestling within the whoever happens to be writing Batman and the Joker at any given time. It's been 10,000 people, it seems like. But there's like, making it that the clown is the criminal,
Right.
right? Like the thing that the clown's always trying to do, the clown in this case specifically being the Joker, is like he's trying to make Batman do what Batman really wants to do, right? And obviously, like, Batman is a cop,
Right.
essentially, but a cop who is a billionaire. And in a movie like Under the Red Hood or The Killing Joke or something, maybe the Red Hood one is not the right movie, but he's basically like trying to make Batman like give in to his impulses, right? I mean, you can't answer that because you haven't seen it, but like, and obviously, like, they can't make the guy that works with the cops like a violent murderer.
Yeah.
It's a comic book from the 30s. Like, it's like that was before Pete Seeger wrote like, "What did you learn in school today?" and stuff. Like, we weren't ready for that conversation about like police, but. Like the Joker is constantly trying to unmask Batman. He's like constantly trying to force him to like indulge his violence. Right?
Have you ever read Superposition by David Graeber? It's that article he wrote about superheroes.
No.
Oh, it's so cool. And he talks about this.
If I'm being totally honest with the world, I think superheroes are one of the lamest things ever. I mean, Batman is cool because he doesn't have powers, but like once the villains have powers, it's shitty.
I think you'd like this article. He talks about Christopher Nolan's movies and basically takes the angle that they start and end as like anti like Occupy Wall Street propaganda. And I want to read you a little paragraph here. I'm gonna stop myself from reading too much. You can know that like generally he talks about the Joker as basically, like you said, the bad guy who has all the creative ideas, who like often actually has somewhat noble intentions, but then like he does something like he has like some kind of weird, almost unnecessary Machiavellian twist.
He's like the embodiment of the thing that authority figures see in the people that they police, right?
That is exactly what this article is about. Yes.
Yeah, suck it, Graeber.
Nolan's villains, in short, are always anarchists, but they're always very peculiar anarchists of a sort that seem to exist only in the filmmaker's imagination.
My favorite thing about Bane is when he walks out into the football field and he's like, "That boy has a beautiful voice."
I don't know what you're talking about, but I've seen that movie.
It's okay. Well, it happens. He's a human swamp creature.
To finish the quote, they are anarchists who believe that human nature is fundamentally evil and corrupt. The Joker, the real hero of the second movie, makes all of this explicit. He is the id become philosopher. I'll just leave it there. I think that's cool. Especially when we were listening to these philosopher clown videos.
Yo, I don't know. It's just I'm really intrigued by the idea of the fool, the clown, the jester. The Heyoka is like interesting to me as a mystery because it's just not the thing I looked into. I'm just super intrigued by the whole concept of what the clown is now. I'm amazed at how intrigued because just this time last week, well, maybe not this time because this is probably after we decided we were going to do this episode, but I just couldn't. I don't think I could have taken them seriously.
Right, but we both had the experience, and we both had that experience of watching that video you posted and watching this clown try to put leaves on a tree and like crying.
Yeah, you said it almost made you cry. It actually made me cry, and I just didn't cop to it. It was like, it like made it so obvious, like how childish the approach that we take to like just being like people that have to exist on a planet.
There's like a whole universe of emotion in that action. It's amazing. I want to be more like a clown, I think, in certain ways. I mean, who do we have? We have comedians. Comedians usually end up sucking. I don't know. The more you make powerful people look good, even indirectly, at the very least, your humor has to be safe, to get on stage, to get a TV show, to get a tour even. So, you know, the leading comedians end up being kind of lame and kind of washed out after a certain period of time. And it sucks. But I think clowns can be more than that. I think clowns should not be entangled with fame, you know?
No, they're like diametrically opposed to it.
Exactly.
Like the only clowns that become famous are like ones that we don't even know actually existed. Like nobody thinks well, maybe, I don't know, maybe this is just me and all people are me, but that's usually how I think about things. All people are me. But, you know, I never knew Bozo the Clown was a real clown, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean...
Right.
In as far as, like, any clown can be real. I mean, they're obviously characters, except for, like, there's a couple, like, wise people that have actually become clowns. But,
yeah,
you know, I never knew Harlequin wasn't, like, you know, the Scarlet Pumpernickel, or what is that? The Scarlet Pimpernel?
Pimpernel?
Yeah, not pumpernickel. That's a delicious bread that you get at Outback Steakhouse. You know, that's what I thought the Harlequin was. I didn't realize that it was like archetypical or whatever, or Pierrot. I mean, I didn't get a chance to read Pierre Lunaire, whatever. I don't speak French. I didn't get a chance to read it. I mean, you showed me the thing about the moth, which like is like that like what was that, like a single poem, or is that like more than that and you only showed me an excerpt or something? But it's like,
that was a single poem out of 50. Yeah,
Jesus, that's a lot of fucking poetry.
poetry.
Anyway, that was like,
at least they're all the same length and meter. They're not that long.
That moth poem was like enough to like have like the same effect as like a microdose, you know?
Yeah,
it's like how many other archetypes can have that effect besides what the clown is?
yeah. It's
like,
maybe Jesus.
Is Jesus an archetype though, or is he just like,
He's like I feel like he's an archetype he's like a half-baked archetype.
There is an
has
archetype,
aspects of other archetypes.
There's like an archetype that is built around Jesus. Like Luke Skywalker is kind of Jesus, right?
I think that Jesus is an archetype, but he's the kind of archetype that's so dominant that it's hard to see him in the same way that we see these other archetypes. Like, he's the son of the virgin birth. That's part of it. But he's also Zarathustra and Buddha. You know, he's a couple different archetypes, and that is, you know, in deep time, that's a pretty new archetype, I think. You know, the holy person who influences a mass number of people. It kind of needs to exist in like large societies. It can't be super, super ancient. Whereas certain archetypes can go back to before we had language, I think, you know. So I wanted to read you this poem as well because I think there is an interesting parallel between like clowns who become immortalized.
Is this your poem?
No, and Jesus. Jesus as sort of a clown. People question his authenticity. They question whether he was real because of his exceptionality, right? Because of the way that he's echoed through time, which probably has little to do with how he originally started, but he kind of exists in a way as a bit of a sacred clown as well, because he's a kind of a question mark that popped up in the middle of multiple levels of dogmatic authority, and he kind of cut through all of them. You know.
Can you remind me the name of the person that you're talking about?
Jesus.
I thought I missed you talking about somebody else. Okay.
No, I'm talking about Jesus.
Those things those are not the things that I think about when I think about Jesus. Okay. I'm on board with you.
I'm trying. Yeah. I'm trying a little bit, you know, to. Okay, cool. So this is just one stanza. This is poem number 30 out of 50. In that in the Pierre Lunaire poem cycle, the full cycle, not just the ones from the. Anyways, stanzas are holy crosses on which poets quietly bleed to death. They lose their sight because of a quivering, ghastly swarm of hungry vultures. With swords, their cold corpses have delighted in festivals of blood scarlet. Stanzas are holy crosses on which poets quietly bleed to death. They have departed and have stiffened their tresses far away from crowds to the clamor of animals, adjusting the suns on their heads like a red royal crown. Stanzas are holy crosses. Now there is indeed one point at which the story of the stories of all plants, and which took place mainly on land, come together with the story of that old saltsome expanse. It so happens that one of the many possible stances that could have been taken was taken quite arbitrarily by another, one of the many several mimes in the employ of the fighting chance. The reader will be happy to know that the mime had spent all afternoon being creative, and from their position they really did understand. The point of convergence was precisely at the edge of the blue ocean where salt mingled with sand, and they swore, though later none would believe it, that they even could hear a few lines of a comedy in which the sand and salt played the parts of the innumerable celestial bodies, delighting the water who became lost in the drama and laughed to see to the possibility of apricots into the shape of a cupped hand. And it was all a terrible little accident.
Yeah, Pure Lunaire is really psychedelic. I know.
Yeah, it's sweet. I can't get the image of the sun as like a red royal crown that adjusts on the head out of my head.
The tresses thing kind of threw me until you were talking about the crown.
What's a tress?
I know it as like a lock of hair.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like something else also. I wanted to like divert real quick just to talk about like what the class clown is. Because that's like its own like quarter archetype, right?
Sure.
I'm gonna read another quote from, what was his name? Reinhardt, the clown from A Clown's Philosophy, the Atlantic video. The clown is the master of failure. He loves the fiasco, and when you want to do something funny, most of the time it's not funny. But if you wait, something happens. Everybody can take something from it. Everything is important, but nothing is really very serious. So the class clown is like important, right? It's important to have. I think it's something that like teachers don't appreciate, because I think teachers are just like so beaten down by the fact that they have to spend their entire day around children that they can't actually control. Like, yeah, I remember I said something at one point that I'm pretty sure got cut from the episode that I said it during, but like I had to work with teenagers for most of like the first like 5 years of my like actual adult life. I spent working around teenagers, and I feel like it really like hampered my growth for a while, like until I got away from that and was like strictly working with adults. But with that said, like teachers are like people that like need, in a big way, they need the class clown, right? When a classroom becomes too serious, like learning cannot happen, you know. I think it might suck for the kid, because like Reinhardt said, like they are the master of failure. Like, you know, typically, even if it has nothing to do with like the kid's actual ability to take a test or whatever, like it's something that a teacher doesn't appreciate. Like they don't treat the kid the same way that everybody else gets treated.
There will always be class clowns.
Yeah, it's like
the
necessary.
teacher who can't incorporate the class clown into the class in some way is not doing their full job as a teacher. Wow. That's, Randy, you're kind of blowing my mind. That's such a cool connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, say some more about it. I don't know, you might have something interesting to say.
I don't know. I mean, I remember those moments. I also remember that one person in my class whose name was Colby, and he spelled it Wolby on the seating chart, and kind of allegedly noticed it while it was up on the board. But because this teacher was such a kind of a goof, he like played it off as a joke. And it almost felt like he was happy that it happened, for sure. He was not embarrassed, to the point that it felt intentional, even though it probably wasn't. And I felt like it did two things. One, it assigned this kid, Colby, the moniker Wolby, and kind of made him, he was quiet, smart but quiet. It kind of assigned him the role of of a kind of a class clown, but also he didn't really play the part. The teacher was the class clown in this class. If someone would make fun of him, he would say, "That's so embarrassing," and he wouldn't, and just move on. He was unshakable. It was a very interesting subversion of that dynamic.
You remember what he called Matt?
What he called Matt? No.
Squints.
Squints.
Yeah.
He had some good nicknames for people.
Nicknames. I remember one time I had like a bottle that, like a water bottle that would spray. It had like a mist setting besides the normal drinking setting. And so I used to fill it with sticky stuff, and I would spray it when he walked past my desk.
Oh my god.
It was fun. I love that class. He was the best teacher, right?
He was the best teacher because he literally like realized that he needed to have inside of him both the roles of like clown and king, the archetypes of ruler and jester. He was the only teacher that ever.
What if he's been listening to this the whole time since episode
God.
1, and he never knew it was two of his students?
I saw him at the zoo one time because I worked at the zoo gift shop. I saw him in there one time, and I went up to him and said hi. And just like he always told me, he said he has face blindness and he can't recognize people out of context. He had no idea who I was. He had no idea. I don't know. He didn't make everybody in the class feel good. There were definitely people that were annoyed by him. I remember one student making like a really sassy comment to him because like he was being kind of annoying, and him just like completely deflecting it. Like, like you could just not do. Mike used to lift up his magnets and draw penises behind them, like realistic penises behind them.
Well,
when he wasn't in the room.
I mean, Mr. Nyland had like permanent senioritis.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a clown.
But Mike is another person that, like, to me, kind of like, just having been able to like more fully absorb the idea of what the clown is. Like, Mike is like very, very much that role to me.
Yes,
that's how I remember him. I mean, I have no idea how he is now, of course, but just as like, I mean, he is like one of the archetypical people that I feel like kind of helped to shape my worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Which is crazy. It's crazy to think about. But yeah, I don't know. That's just like the space that Mike. Mike is one of the people that occupies that space for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I have like a little bit more of the vocabulary to be able to talk about what it is as an archetype.
There's a time that Mike was sitting around the dinner table with his dad and me, and his dad was telling a story that Mike had heard a bunch of times, and Mike just didn't. And Mike knew that I had heard it before, even though I was playing, I was going along with it and saying, "Oh wow," laughing at the right spots. And Mike was kind of like doing little interjections, and he was sitting like behind, kind of next to me, and I was looking at his dad, so I didn't see Mike's face. And at the very end of the story, like at the punchline, his dad finally like lands the punchline. I chuckle or whatever, and Mike, I hear over my shoulder, I hear, and just this sustained that sounds like real laughter. And I turn my head and I look at Mike, and this is his face, not moving, producing like a ventriloquist, like moving, producing like a full-bellied laugh without moving his face. It was the funniest fucking thing I have ever seen in my life.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That is exactly the quality of him that I'm talking about.
Yes.
I mean, I remember him, like, I went over to his house, I think one time ever. Mm-hmm. And I remember he kept putting his ferret up my shirt. But he was so serious about it. Like, it was like the government told him to do it or something.
Oh my god.
Which is exactly what I'm talking about. It's the reminder of serious things.
Yep. Yeah, I think Mike's a clown in that way. Like, as a kid, he was the archetypal class clown for sure.
for sure. He's like the epitome, like in like the weird way that things become so much bigger in your memory. Like,
yeah.
Of how everything is important, but nothing is serious. I mean, the memory that is triggered when I heard that phrase in A Clown's Philosophy, when I just read it a couple times as I was writing it, and since I wrote it down, it was so important that ferret be in my shirt, but it wasn't serious at all. I don't know. It's very, very cool the way that the clown makes you feel about things. I don't know.
Yeah.
I kind of wish we had Mike here as like a correspondent. Okay, so what do we got anything else?
Let me go back and look at.
I think somebody has.
Look at the outline.
Yeah, I think somebody has to say something cool before we come in.
Oh god.
I mean, we've been going for like 90 minutes or something. Yeah, hour 20.
What would it take for clowns to become sacred again? Or, is it just? Is there some intrinsic way? I mean, my intuition is that there's something connected. I think that the clandestine insurgent rebel clown army are kind of on the right track, but I don't quite like their optics. I think they're too traditional. The idea that like clowns are tied to like the overturning of a social order is like it's right on. And I think that for clowns to become like an important part of daily life, for clowns to be taken again importantly but not seriously, there does need to be a fundamental change in society. But I don't think they're like the same thing. I don't think like you get more clowns, you get an overturn of capitalism, obviously. But I do think there's that like pushing into that.
Actually, when there were more clowns, capitalism started.
What do you mean?
There were more clowns in the world when capitalism began.
Yeah. Well, right, but they've decreased since capitalism started. Oh,
That's
right, yeah.
saying.
Capitalism ate the clowns.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how are they less sacred? I mean, think about how much more of an event it is to encounter a clown than it is to like see a priest or something out in the wild.
And there's many places and times where a priest, where a clown is a priest in many places. Why?
Definitely at the circus. I mean, it's just like you exchange the wafers and wine for banana flavored peanuts and Coca-Cola or something.
Maybe
the sacrament's different, but
then that brings up the question of like, well, then why isn't that the case? Why isn't it the case that when you go to the circus, you have a religious experience most of the time? And maybe it's because the framework of a religious experience is itself, it's too serious.
I mean, I had a more profound. I mean, I think it like behaves the same way as like a religious experience. I had a more profound revelation from clown philosophy than I did ever with like Christ or.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been reading about like Taoism, for example. I've been reading the Tao Te Ching for so long. Like, the magic is so much less when I read like, just when I rediscover like some verse there, it's so much less than the effect that like that clown had on me the one time. I mean, regular like religion becomes like so commonplace, I think. In whatever shape it takes in a person's life, like it becomes so commonplace that like I think a thing like the place that like the clown occupies now, I think it's like teed up for a more significant experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many people that go to church like ever like galaxy brain about it?
Yeah. How many people that have told you that they had some kind of revelation at church seem genuine? I mean, pushing some kind of business. Honestly, just to put it vulgarly, business. Like,
9 times out of 10, it's a multi-level marketing scheme.
yeah. Yeah, I think that part of it's that you kind of can't put clowning into a book in the same way. I mean, you can read the poem Piero Lunaire and it can have a great effect on you, but I just mean, like, you can't prose clowns in the same way that you can prose, like, Taoism or religion to an extent. But maybe that's the reason that it feels that way to you. Like, when you see there's something extremely beautiful in watching this clown put the leaves back on a tree.
I mean, that's one of the most, like, that specifically is one of the most, like, stunning things I've ever seen on video, just in terms of, like, the profundity of it.
Yeah. It's hard to...
It was, like...
Right, it was...
fertile. I don't know.
It kind of escapes words. And I mean, that is... Right, that's a sacred thing to be able to do. Why don't we think...
That's more similar to what, like, I imagine a religious experience to be than anything I've ever experienced before. I mean, there's times when I've been, like, in a bad place and I thought the answer was to go and, like, think about something in, an empty church.
Mm-hmm.
But it never, like, gave me the kind of insight that I got from... I almost said something... Reinhardt. I almost said Reichstag. That's not the word that I'm thinking of. That was a pretty serious thing too, but not for me so much. Don't worry, I'll cut that. You don't have to even think about it. Just seeing Reinhardt, whatever his last name is, do that. It just gave me, it gave me more insight than any experience I've had with traditional religion. I mean, I didn't pray about it, but
you didn't need to.
I didn't need to. It did it for me. It was like prayer.
Yeah, there was something prayerful about the way he was doing it. Like,
well, because it, like, doesn't that single act of him, who's to say whether only he could say whether or not he did it spontaneously or whether it's something he does all the time as, like, part of his act. And he is just, like, the best one. He's, like, the one that's able to make you think the most. Because, I mean, there is a best clown, for sure. And, like, it could be him. I don't know. I don't know enough about buffoonery to say whether or not it is. I mean, you think about, like, what is it now that's going on? The Golden Globes? Like, where that is a trade show, like, I feel like, somebody like the Philosopher Clown would reject that sort of thing. I think they would have to still be what they are. But I think what I was saying a second ago was that, like, that single act of him, like, showing that he doesn't understand how to put the pieces back together. I just think that is, like, I don't know. I think that's, like, the distillation of, like, everything I know about every religion that I know anything about.
Some clowns are mimes, right? But even the clowns who don't speak, they play with opposites too. But just to focus on the ones that do speak, because it's easier to illustrate the example. I mean, if you're speaking in opposites, if you're saying, up is down and good is bad, or you're doing, or you're like, I don't know, you try to, like, stoke up a fire by throwing water on it. These kind of things. These things that actually have consequences, but you treat them in the same, you're like my friend laughing with a complete straight face. You're reacting opposite in spite of the consequences. It allows us to sort of take those opposites out and, like, stretch them out, and reminds us that they're contingent. I think most of the time we live assuming that those opposites are stable and are going to stay in their, like, boxes. They're going to stay in their places and they're going to be asleep so that we can use them. But what a clown does is remind you that the opposites are also, like, in some way, like, alive, and that when they come out and play with each other, like, things happen around them like it reveals to you that it reveals to you the non-neutrality of like having opposites at all.
Thank you for listening to Depth Perception. Join us live Wednesdays at 7:30 Eastern at twitch.tv/depthperceptionpodcast.